All right, let's hear $100 today.
All right, at the end of the sixth reading, the poem of testimony concludes.
Yeah.
And the seventh and final reading of Parshat Haazinu opens with the Jewish people hearing the poem, listening to the poem. But at this point, we will hear also of the passing of the Baton from Moshe Rabbeinu to Yoshua ben Nun, Moses to Joshua. Vayavei Moshe. Moshe came. Where did he come to? It says he came. So the Malbim says after he went to each and every single tribe, and he commanded or instructed them to come to the tent of meeting, there they gathered, and that's when Moshe came. And then when Moshe Rabbeinu came there, Vayidaber eskol divrei hashira hazes, he spoke all the words of this song. And he did so be'oznei ha'am, in the ears of the nation. And the Torah tells us who he, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu, the Hoshea ben Nun, and Hoshea, the son of Nun. So what is the meaning of Vayidaber eskol divrei hashira hazes? Moshe Rabbeinu spoke all these words be'oznei ha'am. After all, already in the previous chapter, we said Vayidaber Moshe be'oznei kol kahal Yisrael. That was in chapter 31 yet, at the end of chapter 31. And here the Torah seems to be repeating itself, saying that Moshe spoke all these words be'oznei ha'am, in the ears of the nation. So the Abarbanel says that Moshe Rabbeinu repeated this poem 3 times. In the end of Parshas Vayelech, when he went and gathered all the people together, at that point he received the prophecy, and he immediately conveyed the prophecy as he got the transmission. He conveyed it, he passed it on. Then he called the elders, the officers. It says, Hakilu Elai kol ziknei shiftechem. And so he spoke to the elders then. And then after he spoke to the elders and charged the leadership of the Jewish people with this message, then he said it, he repeated it now a 3rd time to the entirety of the nation. So, but this time, the 3rd time Moshe Rabbeinu says it, the Torah emphasizes that it's who? V'Hoshea ben Nun. It's him and Yehoshua. What does this mean, him and Yehoshua? So it means, says Rashbam, they both spoke. It's pretty clear that Yehoshua gets a speaking part here. You know, there's a silly joke. A little boy came home, he's very excited to get a part in the school play. His mother said, what part did you get? And the boy said, I'm going to be the husband. So the mother said, I thought you were going to get a speaking part. Yehoshua gets a speaking part here. He's not just present. It says, Vayidaber eskol divrei hashira hazes, he spoke the words of this song. It says clearly who? Ve'Hoshea ben Nun. Moshe Rabbeinu and Hoshea, or Yehoshua, both had a speaking part. They both said it. So let's take a look now in Rashi. Rashi says, who? Ve'Hoshea ben Nun. Him and Yehoshua. What's up with this business of them both speaking? Says Rashi, Shabbos shel diyuzge hoisa. This was a Shabbos of a twinned leadership. So the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life was Shabbos. And the terminology, Shabbos, the Zivgi, or Shabbos of the Yuzge, is a terminology that comes from the Gemara. The Gemara tells us there that there was a time when Rabbi Gamliel was deposed as a Nasi, and in his stead, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed. But then later, Rabbi Gamliel was reinstated. But they didn't exactly move Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah aside. So there will be a Shabbos Shomi. Who was speaking this Shabbos? There's 2 rabbis sharing the same pulpit. Not an easy thing. But then there's this concept of Shabbos Shel Diyuzgi. So Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak, shared the pulpit with Yehoshua. They both spoke. The Shabbos was divided among 2 leaders. Now, on a literal level, the beginning of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Rebbe. By the afternoon, Yehoshua was the Rebbe. It was the same day, two different Rebbes. Moshe Rabbeinu leaves, Yehoshua immediately begins. That's what it means on a very literal level. The terminology, by the way, the yuzge, comes from the Greek word duo, which is actually an English word. So the word duo, a duet or a duo, is you have a couple, a group. But the thing is this, it's obvious that when Moshe Rabbeinu was no longer there, Yehoshua stepped into the role. He was already pre-appointed. Everything was already arranged. So it's self-understood that Moshe Rabbeinu was there as long as Moshe Rabbeinu was there. And we know Moshe Rabbeinu passed during the daytime. Okay, so Yehoshua automatically was the Rebbe. What is the Torah trying to tell us when it emphasizes Hu v'Hoshea ben Nun? So Rashi says, what happened was, Nitla Reshus Mizeh, v'nitna lezeh. Dominion was taken, the scepter, if you will. The baton was taken from one and given to the next. And this means, because there was no scepter, and he didn't actually have a baton. So what does it mean that dominion was passed? What was the dominion of Moshe Rabbeinu? He didn't sit on a throne, he didn't wear a crown. What exactly was passed on? So Rashi says it means, Shehem edlei Moshe meturgaman liYeshua. A meturgaman is a person who serves as the go-between, between the leader and between the nation, indicating that there's a vast gap between the two. And somebody has to mind the gap. Somebody has to, so to speak, be able to relate to the nation, but at the same time to be able to relate to this great leader. So there was a meturgaman who was appointed for Yehoshua. And that was a sign of his leadership of being exalted. And that is to say, for what do you need a meturgaman? Once upon a time, a meturgaman was needed to be able to convey the profundity of the message to the people. Because the message was delivered at a very high level, not targeting the lowest common denominator. He's talking about the emet, the truth of Torah. And the truth of Torah has to be given in an unadulterated way. But how will the people understand it? They're not there. You're talking about the highest level of Torah, but the highest level is a small percentile. How will the vast majority of the people, the ordinary individuals, be able to understand the message being conveyed? And the answer is you have a meturgaman. So here Yehoshua was now the one expounding on the next level of Torah. He was the one who was sharing Torah not as it had to relate to the people, but Torah as it was, objectively speaking. And so Moshe Rabbeinu is not the only one speaking now. Yehoshua speaks too. And why was this? This was that he should be a leader, meaning the Torah leadership is about Torah teaching. He should teach Torah in his life. Kedei, in order, Shalayemru Yisrael, the children of Israel, the Jewish people, the nation, shouldn't say to Yehoshua, during the lifetime of your Rebbe, nobody heard a word from you. You didn't have the courage to raise your head up. You weren't able to be a leader. And now all of a sudden, you're a leader? How'd that happen? So Moshe Rabbeinu had to demonstrate and show the Jewish people how Yehoshua was presidential. He had to show him in a light, of leadership light. And only when he was presented to them, they saw him in a leadership light, then they could appreciate, yes, we see him already as a leader, even in the lifetime of Moshe Rabbeinu. And why is he referred to here as Hoshea? Rashi says, Loimar, this is to tell you something about Yehoshua, to give you an insight into Yehoshua's persona. He was profoundly uncomfortable. He wasn't happy about this, being thrust into a leadership position in front of his Rebbe's presence. He wasn't happy. That even though he was given grandeur and greatness, he held himself extremely humbly. Just as he was when he began. When he began, he was a Hoshea, simple fellow. He still felt himself as being a simple fellow. In other words, the prominence and the position didn't get to him. It didn't alter him in any way. He remained the same simple, humble individual.
So how is he perceived if Moshe wrote the Torahs and everything, and here he is trying to transition into a new leadership here?
There's definitely a transition going on. and Yehoshua was never going to be Moshe Rabbeinu. As the Gemara says, that Moshe is metaphorized as Pnei Chama. Moshe is metaphorized as the sun, and Yehoshua, at best, could be Pnei Levana, the moon. The moon is pretty impressive, but not next to the sun.
Yeah.
It only reflects the light of the sun. So Moshe Rabbeinu was an original. Yehoshua was a reflection.
Tall shoes.
But still,
Yeah.
it was impossible shoes to fill.
Yeah.
There is only one Moshe Rabbeinu. But nonetheless, Yehoshua was Yehoshua. And he was the leader of the Jewish people, and he brought us into Eretz Yisrael. He was an extremely prominent person. He was a great person. Just because he couldn't be Moshe doesn't mean he wasn't a great person.
For sure.
The point was that they couldn't see him presidentially altogether. He didn't project that kind of persona or image. So something had to happen. And in this transitional Shabbos, something big happened. What happened? Yehoshua assumed the position of leadership. Yehoshua was now raised. And in his new position of leadership, he was able to exude and to resonate a level of importance and prominence. He was now perceived as a leader for the people. So all of a sudden, when he actually was the leader, they could see him as such. Because they had already seen him during the lifetime of Moshe Rabbeinu. Had they not seen him during Moshe Rabbeinu's lifetime as such, they wouldn't have been able to perceive him like that with the passing of Moshe. So that's how Rashi explains his business of Hu V'Hoshea Ben Nun, the speaking part of Yehoshua. In simple words, Moshe Rabbeinu at this point convenes the assembly and speaks the words of the poem so that all the people can hear it. As we said, like from the Abarbanel, right? Now, in order to demonstrate that authority is passing from him to Yehoshua, in order to forestall the possible objections that the people would say Yehoshua isn't really the person, so therefore Moshe Rabbeinu had Yehoshua repeat the poem. He delivered the poem, and then he handed the paper to Yehoshua. Now you deliver the poem. He used notes, I guess. He read from the book. Moshe Rabbeinu said it. Yehoshua said it. And Yehoshua, who was usually simply a disciple by Moshe, now has his words also elucidated by somebody who could best be called a paraphraser, the Meturgaman. And this is the same kind of notion, the paraphrasing assistance, that Moshe Rabbeinu himself always utilized. In other words, this is Yehoshua's first official act of leadership. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu is still alive, Moshe is still a leader. Yehoshua already has now burnished his credentials with an act of leadership. So on the day that Moshe Rabbeinu served as the people's leader, who else served as the people's leader? Yehoshua. That's the Shabbos Shel Yuzgi. That's this dual thing. But Rashi adds that despite this incredible honor and this elevated new position, Yehoshua continued to comport himself with great humility. In other words, he felt like he was still a novice. Just like he was when he began with Moshe Rabbeinu as his disciple, not as the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu. All right, let's analyze this. So if you open the Devarim book,
something must have made him feel empowered.
listen here what the Rebbe says, and then you'll tell me if you still have a question. How's that? All right, so we're going to go to page Reish Vav. Rebbe asks a very interesting question about this Rashi. Rashi, as a rule, will transcribe words or a word and explain, elucidate. Transcribe a word, and then he'll elucidate. Rashi here actually speaks about 3 different things. No less than 3 different ideas are being conveyed here in the same Rashi. Number 1, Rashi explains the meaning of Shabbos Shel Yuzga. What was the Shabbos? What does that mean? He explains there was actually 2 leaders. Talks about the word duo, where it comes from. Number 2, Rashi introduces us to the idea of what does leadership look like when you're a Rebbe in antiquity. How would leadership be perceived? Let's say in Chassidus, at least in Chabad Chassidus, what means a Rebbe? A Rebbe delivers a mimer. So till the Rebbe actually delivered a mimer on Yud Shvat, Tafshin Yud Aleph, and Yud Shvat 1951, which is the first anniversary, the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe, the people felt the Rebbe didn't accept the position until he said a mimer, because anybody could give a talk, but a mimer is something only a Rebbe gives, an original mimer. So somebody would ask, well, how did the Rebbe demonstrate or express his acceptance of, despite the great reluctance, but the acceptance ultimately as a Rebbe, the ascendancy to being a Rebbe? This was saying a mimer. So the question is, in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu and Yoshua, what was the sign of ascendancy? What was the sign of Yoshua's leadership? At what point does he become a leader? So Rashi told us the notion of the paraphraser, the interpreter. Ha'amodas, ha'meturgaman, that was the sign. Because who had a meturgaman? Only a Rebbe. Why? Very simple. A meturgaman means you no longer are trying to speak to the people, meaning taking them into account if they do understand, don't understand, maybe they're falling asleep, tell a little joke, do a little dance. You have to, you're trying to engage the people. That's when you're the Rebbe, your job is to say the truth of Torah. So a Rebbe doesn't orate, the Rebbe delivers the Torah straight. Speaker orates. He's got to engage the people. He has to get the message across. So he has to use a variety of mediums. It's not only the content, it's not only the substance, there's a tremendous emphasis on the style. But a Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have any style. He stuttered. He was not an orator in any way, shape, or form. What did he give the Jewish people? The Torah. Straight goods. It's possible that Yeshua had spoken before, but if he spoke before, Yeshua was giving a talk. And as giving a talk, there was style along with substance. But here, now Yehoshua uses a paraphraser, which means he doesn't emphasize style at all. It's only substance. Because now he has to speak on the highest level, and he has to deliver a message in an uncompromising way. So that's the second point. The third point is, why does it say Hosea? We haven't seen the name Hosea in a very long time. Since prior to the Meraglims being sent 38 years earlier, he hasn't been called Hosea. And here on the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu, all of a sudden Hosea. So Rashi explains that despite the fact that he was thrust into this position of tremendous prominence, he didn't get it. He remained humble, seeing himself as a novice. So there's actually three different things being conveyed here in this Rashi. Had they get dumped into the same Rashi? Why did Rashi all of a sudden decide here at the end of the Torah that he's going to start to elucidate and clarify things by taking multiple ideas, multiple insights and elucidations, and conflating them into one long run-on sentence? It's not Rashi's style. He should have told us, he should have said, Hu v'Hosea, Shabbos shel Yuzgi. Then he should have said, maybe again, V'Hosea. Or maybe he should have said, Moshe Rabbeinu spoke, Vayedaber, V'Gomer, V'Hosea. Who spoke? Yehoshua spoke? What do you mean he spoke? Why was he speaking? What was the point of him speaking? If Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking, why didn't Yehoshua speaking? And then Rashi could explain that he had a meturgaman, he had a paraphraser, so that's what was going on. And then he could say a separate thing. He should have a new Dibra Maskell, Hosea. And ask the question, Yehoshua, why was he not called Yeshua? And then Rashi will explain, you know why? To tell you that he wasn't taken by all the honor, the glory. The position didn't change him. Positions tend to change people. Power corrupts. Positions change. Prominence has a way of modifying. Not Yoshua. Nothing. No change whatsoever. The same humble person he was before, the same humility afterwards. So clearly we must say, Shekol Echad, that the additional two interpretations are actually one long continuation of the first interpretation. The first elucidation that Rashi offers us is Shabbos shel Yuzgi. And then he has to continue that by explaining the business of the Turgaman, the paraphraser, and then afterwards explain why it says Hosea and not Yehoshua, but one leads to the next. In other words, there's a domino effect here. They're actually, in the end, not three separate comments. And this is how the Rebbe explains it. The words of Rashi, Shabbos shel Yuzgi, which the duo Shabbos, where nitla reshus mizeh v'nitna lezeh, One Rishus dominion was taken from one and passed on to the next. In other words, Manhigase shel Yeshua, the leadership of Yeshua began when? B'chayav shel Moshe. Anointed would be for the future. But he was not only anointed, he was actually inaugurated. His leadership began when Moshe Rabbeinu was still alive. That's a very unusual thing. This is Ma'ir Tmiyah. This stimulates a big, fat question mark. Madua huvra manigus li Yeshua beifin kazeh. Why was Yeshua a Rebbe when the Rebbe was still there? You can't have two drivers in the same car.
So it's the last day of his life.
Fine. So when Moshe Rabbeinu will pass, Yeshua will step into the lurch. What do you need two leaders for?
It's the last day.
Last day.
Handover.
Moshe Rabbeinu, no, there's no handovers. Moshe Rabbeinu is a Rebbe till the last moment.
Of course he is.
That's
that doesn't negate the fact that Yeshua is a Rebbe.
Yeshua doesn't need to be a Rebbe when Moshe is a Rebbe. You have one Rebbe at a time. Malchus lo negas bechaverta. When you have dominion, you can't have two dominions. It's not dominion then. If it's dominion, it's absolute. The nature of dominion is absolute. If Moshe Rabbeinu is here, it's Moshe Rabbeinu's dominion.
But Hashem specifically told Moshe that your successor is going to be Yeshua.
That's fine. You
So
could know
it's like
the heir.
it's
The heir.
from God Himself.
The heir apparent could be known. It doesn't mean that he's actually serving as the leader.
But is there a problem to be tutored for a position?
No, there's no problem to be appointed for a position. There's no problem to be presented for a position. The problem is to assume the position. If you think about it, it actually doesn't make sense. How could you have two things filling the same space? Imagine there's a space. There's a space called leadership. Who is the Rebbe now? Well, there's two Rebbes. I don't know what that means.
For one day.
What do you mean two Rebbes? It's an absolute thing.
Tam Yisrael had a problem.
It's like a woman having two husbands. You can't have it. It doesn't work like that.
Moshe's level was too high for the people at that time?
He was alive. He's alive. He was there for them. He couldn't not be a Rebbe. If Moshe Rabbeinu is the Rebbe, Moshe is the Rebbe. This is actually a problem. We have this principle, ein malchus negas bechaverta. You can't have it at the same time. One ends, another begins. You can't have it at the same time.
And it's not just shadowing. It's not just...
But it's not just shadowing. He was the Rebbe. Yeshua was already a leader. Hamed lebeturgaman. This doesn't make any sense. Incidentally, historically speaking, it was never such a thing. If it's a leader, it's a leader.
But there's-
One passes, the next is you.
There's Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. Hillel and Shammai were
Hillel and Shammai were not co-leaders. They were great leaders of the Jewish people, great tzaddikim and great expounders, but Hillel was the Nasi.
What about Avtalion and...
Shmai and Avtalion,
Okay.
it's very good. It's called a Zugais. There were times when the Jewish people had two leaders, and this was itself a paradigm shift from the way it always had been before. And there's a lot to discuss about that. But clearly there wasn't a position of a Rebbe, of a singular Rebbe there.
Okay, let's find out.
You understand the questions? And the issue is an issue. So why was it like that? Why couldn't you have Yehoshua Yorash as Moshe Lachar Moshe? It's like inheriting something when somebody's still alive. You can't inherit. If the inheritor is still alive, you can't be the heir. The heir only inherits after the passing of the one who bequeaths. Which this is the way it is. Kinog b'derech klal b'havaras shilton. Shlomo HaMelech wasn't the king when David HaMelech was the king. Shlomo HaMelech becomes the king when David HaMelech passes. Al kach Meshav Rashi. For this Rashi answers. Hamed le Moshe meturgaman Yeshua. It had to be this way. He had to appoint the paraphraser. Because otherwise, what would the Jewish people say? Where'd you come from? They wouldn't be able to perceive him. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu was so great, you couldn't simply have Moshe Rabbeinu pass and Yeshua step in. It just wouldn't work. So we had a unique problem here. A unique problem with the successor was so much smaller than the original leader that the people could not have wrapped their heads around it. It would have resulted in anarchy and chaos. There would not have been a seamless transition of leadership. In the life of Moshe, Yeshua was an attendant. He wasn't a son. He wasn't a son-in-law. He wasn't a peer. He was simply an attendant. That's how he was seen. He was seen as a Mesharis. He was called a nar, a kid. He was an old kid, but he was a kid. Just looked at him as a nar. Rochik betachlis mikol machashava shel haramas leish manhigas. He was in every way the furthest thing from a leader. He was a total follower, an attendant, a secretary. He was not seen as a leader. Ilulei huchter lahamadas manhigos oid b'chayim Moshe. Had he not been crowned as a leader during the life of Moshe, hayu b'nei Yisrael miskashim l'kablos manhigos, they simply could not have swallowed it. They couldn't have accepted it. He never could have been able to emerge as a leader. He never could have been seen as a leader. Because the image of who Yoshua was engraved in their minds. This is a Mesharis. This is not a leader. This is an attendant. He is a quiet, humble attendant. He is the ultimate disciple, but never the leader.
So did the greatness of Moshe empower him in fact?
Ultimately, yes, but in the eyes of the people, had Moshe Rabbeinu not raised him to a position of leadership during his lifetime, it never would have happened. L'shem kach hayal Moshe laharim ba'atzmei asoshe. Moshe Rabbeinu had to raise Yoshua up himself during his lifetime yet. La'chtiri od b'chayav. He had to crown him, so to speak, during his lifetime. So much so that he allowed him to do things that only a Rebbe does during his lifetime. In order, not because they needed two Rebbes now. You don't have two Rebbes, you have one Rebbe. But because if he wouldn't have brought him on board, if he wouldn't have presented him as a Rebbe during his lifetime, he never would have become the Rebbe. He couldn't have. But now comes another question. If that's the case, Imam Nam Kavat Sarkosov is coming to tell us that we're coming to strengthen the leadership of Yoshua. Then why in heaven would you call him Hoshea? On the contrary, now is the time you have to call him Yoshua. Now he's not humble. Now he's great. They always looked at him as, oh, Hoshe'ela. Now he's no longer Hoshe'ela. Now he's Yoshua. So why would you call him Hoshea here? In other words, the explanation, the first half of Rashi, is what provokes the second half of Rashi. Al-Kach, and this Rashi answers, if that's the case, for heaven's sake, why is he called Hoshea? It wouldn't be a question so much otherwise. He's called Hoshea, something, Yeshua, something. But if the whole idea is to present him as the great leader, then why in heaven would you call him a name which is the opposite of leadership? For this he says, that's to tell you. You want to know who Yoshua was? He was the person that after he was appointed to greatness, in the lifetime of Moshe, raised up to the position, given the baton, and the right to assert himself as leader in the lifetime of Moshe. Amazing amount of greatness that's been given to him. What about him? How did it affect him? The answer is not in the slightest. He remained the same humble person. His persona was not modified or changed in any way. Hadavar lehevi es Yeshua de gaiva visnasus. He didn't come to a position of grandeur and greatness. Elohonisha shafol ba'ene atzma. In his own eyes, he was always the servant. In his own eyes, ever the chassid. He'll do what has to be done. But in his eyes, how did he see himself? He saw himself as Hoshea, the simple disciple, the attendant, the novice who was there to help Moshe Rabbeinu. And now it all makes sense.